Good afternoon, and thank you so much for coming out on a rainy Friday afternoon. At least the rain stopped with just enough time for everybody to get here and not be wet dogs. But we definitely appreciate your interest in coming out and engaging Dr. Williams. Dr. Damon WIlliams is a nationally renowned consultant on the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. He joined us on campus on April 2nd and met with various campus groups, inclusive of staff, representatives of staff senate, representatives of faculty senate, representatives of student government, and other, the social justice task force, the director of disability support services, the provost, the vice president for student affairs, the vice president for human resources. So he had quite a full day of, I think I counted 9 or 10 different meetings where he engaged with different people and getting feedback from the campus, as well as taking information that we were able to share with him about the campus, previous climate surveys, and so forth. And what he's going to present for us today is his findings on his recommendations for the infrastructure needed to have a thriving and successful Office of Institutional Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, or whatever name it ends up taking on. But just to be sure that this campus is, I believe it's ready in its heart and in its mind, and the culture is ready for the shift, but what are the mechanisms that we need in place? What do we need to have here? What are the action steps? So he's going to be sharing that with us today, and without further ado, because I want the bulk of this time to be his presentation and Q&A, Dr. Damon WIlliams.
I was told that we're recording, so I want to make sure I use the microphone. First off, TCNJ, it's good to see you. I tell you, while I live in hot Atlanta and the weather is much nicer there today, it is sunny. We are full-blown into spring, rounding its way to summer. And so when I saw the rain and the overcast skies today, my emotions were tampered a little bit. But when I knew I was going to get the ray of sunshine, which is TCNJ's community, I started smiling. Because the last time I was with you was about a year ago at your Diversity and Inclusion Forum, and had such an amazing day-long residency. And was very thankful to have a chance to return back to you now and to talk a bit about the report that we've been working on for you all over what is really less than 30 days. And I'll get into that. Now is the time, building a dynamic diversity and inclusion infrastructure at the College of New Jersey. It's always wonderful when you get a chance to come in. Folks reached out to me, and I normally wouldn't take on a project this short notice because we got this done real quick. But the request came from an institution that I had, again, a really lovely residency and some truly wonderful conversations, and know some of your leadership here, and so really glad to have a chance to talk about the report and what we're going to do in terms of kind of presenting some ideas. So today I'm going to talk a bit about the charge, kind of what my charge was today and the methodology that sat underneath it. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking about giving you all a national lens. Probably if I were to ask or poll the group that's here, there's roughly 40 or so people here, we get 40 or so different definitions of what a diversity officer should be doing. And what we found is that oftentimes stands in the way of great progress on behalf of the institution. So I'm going to spend a lot of time kind of giving you all some insight and perspective from my research, the theory in the area, to kind of help everybody kind of level up and be in the same place with respect to understanding this role and what it's all about. I'm also going to give you a sense of what were some of the insights that we learned during our time of engagement. We talked to ultimately across about 9 or so meetings with about 30 or so persons, and then we had an open-ended link, got another 30 or 40 individuals that contributed their perspective in that link, but talked to and tried to get a flavor. What we did by way of discovery and interviewing and stuff like that, far from exhaustive. Good thing I work with 1,000 organizations and I kind of know what it looks like generally when I see it. And so I think what we've come up with is pretty authentic and credible, but it is still evolving. And then we're going to present what were some of the top level of recommendations. The report is in final scrubbing with my team now, and will be delivered today by 5 o'clock p.m. to the Office of the President digitally, right on time. Right on time. And so I got a really great team that works with me to get things done. And so we're really excited about that. I'm going to go up to the podium so I can see very clearly my slides, and we'll keep going from here. So my charge, as I noted, was really over roughly 30 days or so to efficiently talk to some folks, gather some credible TCNJ insights that could help to build out greater understanding of how you could create this elevated vice president level diversity and inclusion role. Inside of that, one of the things I always say is that when you start talking to the campus community, most folks don't want to talk about an officer or a role. They want to talk about what's going on campus. They want to talk about what's going well. They want to talk about what's not going well. They want to talk about unconscious bias. They want to talk about microaggressions. They want to talk about this person didn't speak to me and they should have. They want to talk about everything. And so one of the things that I always say is that even if you ask me to do a task that is so narrow, to do my task credibly, I have to probably do it a little more broadly, but then also make sure that we hit some of those narrow topics. When I use the word diversity, just to ground us here, I'm talking about diversity in big scope, right? I'm not talking about diversity just through a racialized lens. I'm not talking about diversity just through a gendered lens. I'm talking about diversity and really embracing the complexity of diversity and inclusion in all of its manifestations. And as I'm talking and using the term diversity, it is being used in a broad fashion. The first place I'd like to start is, I'd like to start by really defining this idea of, quote, a chief diversity officer and what the role is. And, I was a doctoral student at the University of Michigan, what is now, quite a number of years ago. It was 1998. And I'll never forget, I went to my dissertation advisor, the legendary higher education organizational professor, Marv Peterson. And I said to Marv, I've been staffing these meetings as a doctoral student for the senior vice provost for multicultural and international affairs and special assistant to the president. He goes to these meetings with all of the commiserate officers across the Big Ten, and they meet, and all of them are doing the same type of work, at least on the surface. So when the student affairs people all get together, they're doing the same work. When the presidents get together, they're all doing the same work. But when these diversity people get together, it looks really, really inconsistent and different. I said, there's one person that's got literally 30 units underneath them and control about a $50, $60 million budget. And that's the person here at Michigan. There's another person at the University of Wisconsin at Madison who seems incredibly thoughtful, but they're half-time. And their title is Vice Provost for Faculty Diversity and Academic Affairs, and they teach 2 classes while they do all this work. And they have no budget and no staff. I said, then there's somebody else that sits at the table as well, and that person's here from Northwestern, and that individual is a special assistant to the president for affirmative action and equity, and they've got a team of equity officers and individuals that enforce Title IX and engage in disability services and programs, and that person's at the table too. And I said to my advisor, who was ultimately one of my dissertations, I said, I want to do my dissertation on this. He said, oh, Damon, what a phenomenal study for you to do. I love it. He said, however, that's going to extend your stay here probably about another year and a half. Talk about a downer, right? Talk about a Debbie Downer. And so it was in that conversation, though, that the idea was seeded for a part of my research agenda. I ended up doing a secondary analysis of the Michigan Study student data set so I could get done a little bit more efficiently. But he said to me, and for anybody who endeavors towards a PhD, I offer you this little piece of advice, if you allow me to digress. He said students too often think that their dissertation project is to be the end-all, be-all of their scholarly career. Your dissertation project is simply the beginning and another step in the journey. So any students here in the room, don't kill yourself on the dissertation. Do something that's credible, something that's strong, something you can leverage to start your scholarly career, and then save the big projects you want to do for that big, meaty Intercept R1 grant that I know you're going to get. So this idea of defining the CDO has been a role and a conversation and a question I've had for a long time. What we ultimately found is there were 2 definitions. One was a general definition that the highest ranking diversity administrator of an institution became the chief diversity officer regardless of title, rank, resources, or job role focus, right? So if you were a special assistant to the president, if you were a director, if you were an associate VP, if you were a vice provost or a vice president, whoever was the highest ranked person would oftentimes become that person that was identified as the chief diversity officer. And through the years, from the 80s to the 90s to the millennium to the 2010s to the now, more and more and more and more folks were building more dedicated officer roles. And so everybody started grabbing a hold to the title and using it, whether it was something that was granted officially and formally, or if it was something that simply became a nomenclature that made sense. The thing that I say is I have tremendous respect for anybody that spends one day trying to do that job. Whether you were appointed by the president, whether you were anointed by the Lord, or whether you had a calling just to serve. I have incredible respect for them. However, what we found is that there was a need for a more grounded definition. And so as I think about how I'm offering advice to you, the advice I'm offering is in the context of this more grounded definition. The Chief Diversity Officer reports to the President. They are the highest ranking diversity administrator. The position designates an individual who serves in a senior administrative role working towards diversity-themed organizational change as a top priority at the highest levels of leadership and governance. The role is integrative. It spans administrative and institutional boundaries and reflects the CDO's capacity to lead, coordinate, facilitate, enhance, and at times supervise the formal capabilities of the institution. Now that's a lot. And you can go and buy my wonderful book on Amazon.com titled The Chief Diversity Officer, Strategy, Structure, and Change Management, foreword by President Mark Emmert of the NCAA. But we begin with that as a definition. And we offered in that book the first real structural guidance and a framework, a conceptual framework, for really thinking about how you design this role, but more importantly, how you design the overarching infrastructure. Those of you who know my work at any level know that I wrote 2 books that came out at the exact same time that some totaled about 1,100 pages each. And no, I'm not crazy. And no, I'm not just supremely gifted as a writer or a thinker or a researcher. I just work really, really hard. And I might be a little bit hard-headed. But I'll never forget that I was contracted to write the book on the Chief Diversity Officers, and I submitted the book to my publisher, and he said, "Oh, Damon, this is wonderful." He said, "What you have done here is really captured the essence of Chief Diversity Officers." He said, "But I noticed inside of it, you've got these first 4 or 5 chapters in the book. And the book's now 15 pages and 680 pages long, and I just don't think we can go to market with it." He said, "Unless you want to put a book out that's $99. I said, "Oh." He said, "Why did you write so much in this front matter?" I said, "Because I realized that if I wrote and published the Chief Diversity Officer book without first talking about the diversity strategy and bigger infrastructure, people would think I was saying it was all about a person." And what we all understand is it's not about one person. It's about that person playing a particular role with a team in a collegiality within a culture to move an agenda. So I went back and I wrote for another 1.5 years, and that's how 2 books ended up coming out at the same time. And so I always say, when we think about the design, we begin with the big picture, right? What's our big picture strategic agenda? Where are we trying to go at TCNJ? You know, we know who we are, right? We're an institution that's very selective. We're an institution that's proud of our values and how far we've come. We're an institution that has roots connected to Trenton, but maybe we're not as connected to Trenton today as we are. We're an institution that's been growing in diversity along the dimensions of race and ethnicity, and maybe in absolute numbers are more diverse now than ever before. But if you start looking more penetrating into the data, perhaps there's a lower percentage of black students here than there were 20 years ago. We start seeing these different themes, and we know who we are. And so I always say, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we begin with that big agenda, right? We begin with the big picture, and then from there, we start thinking about what's our strategic diversity platform. What is the areas that we're going to prioritize and build goals as it relates to recruitment and retention of diverse faculty, creating an inclusive classroom environment for students, faculty, staff, and community across all backgrounds, engaging these issues in terms of culturally relevant teaching and pedagogy and things in the classroom. So we get to that platform. And then from there, we start thinking about, okay, what's the vertical structure of the role need to look like? What's their lateral relationships need to look like? What types of change management techniques do they need to have to really make this thing fly? And what type of officer do we need to have to be able to push this thing and really do it collaboratively? This is what's referred to as a 5-star model of organizational design, first conceived by Jay Galbraith while a consultant at McKinsey and then a business faculty member at USC. The 5-star organizational design model is as follows. It says we must make our strategy and our structure align. Right? We want our strategy and our structure to align. And so that's what this framework is intended to do, and it guided the analysis and the research that we did to pull together your report, your frameworks, because there's all these different ways that we build a rationale for diversity, and all these different ways that we do the work. We have a social justice rationale. We have an educational rationale. Others will talk about a business case rationale, all situating and elevating diversity and inclusion in importance. Individuals doing this work can be engaged in community partnership work, building bridges into the Black community, into the Latinx community, building bridges into the immigrant community in the area. Individuals in this work could be partnering with the faculty, and with the deans, and with the provost, or with enrollment management around recruitment elements. They could have some elements that they lead themselves, others that they're partners in yield events. This individual should be engaged in leadership development, working to build intentional leadership capacity with students as it relates to the faculty, with staff, and with administration, and also with those who are in front of the classroom. So there's all these different ways that the work can be conceived, and this becomes the body of the work. It's one of the reasons that I say that if there's only one person, and they have no staff and no team, if there's only one person and don't have anybody working with them, that they can get up and say, hey, you're on my team, and we're working on this as a first priority because this is our role, then it creates a lot of challenges. But nowhere will you ever hear me say, it's not a role that everybody should be playing a part in, right? I'm a huge basketball fan. Any basketball fans in the room here? Handful? Well, I know I'm on the East Coast, and I know that Brooklyn Nets just got pushed out. You know, I know they left Jersey not that long ago, and y'all probably still a little salty about that. But I grew up a Lakers fan, and one of the legendary coaches of the Lakers was Phil Jackson. And Phil Jackson, also legendary coach of the Bulls, ran a particular type of offense. What offense did he run, brother? Right there in the back row, right there.
Triangle.
He ran the triangle offense. And the thing about the triangle offense that really set it off as a championship approach was that no matter how great Michael Jordan was, he didn't win a championship until they started running the triangle. Because if Michael Jordan was just over here isolating, scoring 100, the team did not win. And it's the same thing with this officer. And the thing we wrote about in one of the chapters, he said the chief diversity officer is the chief catalyst trying to activate the triangle. In the triangle offense, everybody touches the ball. The ball has to keep moving. Everybody's a part of it. And that's what this person's job should be, to make everyone be a part of it. Now, the thing that I say is when you say that there's this area that we're now going to call strategic diversity stuff, and we're going to start looking at diversity work, not just as this EEO compliance work, or not just this little work we're doing over here around climate inclusion. We want to start looking at this work as a functional area that has priority and premium, and we want to really get after it. Now you're creating something that you put some boundaries around, and you're calling it strategic diversity work, just like you did student affairs, just like you do academic affairs, just like you do HRD. But the difference is this. When you create this bubble, it touches all the other bubbles. It touches all the other bubbles. And one of the things I want to offer here by way of a caution is to understand that if you get somebody who's really good and really thoughtful and capable of doing and providing the type of collaborative leadership you need, you cannot treat that person like sharks in the water and chew and eat them up. Because it represents a renegotiation of organizational space. It represents a renegotiation of the boundaries of how decisions get made potentially. Who supervises what units potentially. Who sets up what types of conversations in what ways potentially. Now notice, nothing inside of what I'm saying suggests that I'm saying that this officer and their role is an autocratic top-down role. Nothing I'm saying is that. What I'm saying is that in the best of circumstance, it's an integrative role that's connecting in a lot of different places. However, it's when those places connect that's when the boundaries are touching and there's the potential that the politics can get really nasty and ugly. It's one of the reasons why I commend President Foster and the team that put together this engagement, because we're doing pre-work, readiness work to go there. Many institutions don't. And as a result, it tends to not be as successful as it could, or it doesn't take off as fast as it could. Hopefully what we're doing here will allow for us to overcome that. As we engage with the community, there were several research questions that we wanted to ask. One was, what is going well at TCNJ in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Number two, what are the challenges in this same given area? Number three, what recommendations do you all have? Not just about this role, but in general, what recommendations do you have? What should be the top priorities that really elevate for this role to really be focused on? And what should be the lateral and vertical structures that they lead? And then, what do you see inside this role? When you think about the ideal person, who are they going to be? Now, the challenge and the issue here is that when most folks start saying, oh yes, we want someone who is a tenured member of the faculty and has all the credibility to really speak to teaching and learning in the classroom when they bring 20 years there. Oh, we love somebody who can get in the community and who can work with the folks in Trenton to really help us build institutional bridges. Oh, wow, President Foster has a huge fundraising agenda. We need someone who can partner with that fundraising agenda. Oh my gosh, as we think about the issues of campus climate and inclusion, we need somebody who doesn't just have respect for diversity and inclusion. We need somebody who's an expert in LGBTQIA. We need somebody who knows all the pronouns and the ones that haven't been created. We need somebody who can partner with international affairs and think about globalization and internationalization and domestic diversity and understands the cutting edge of where we need to go and can do all these things, and they can walk on water and levitate and do wonderful, amazing things and turn invisible when necessary. And so what we know is that it's all about trade-offs, right? So as you move down this pathway, you might find that the perfect officer is one that doesn't have some of those trappings, but they got some other good stuff. But one of the things that we saw inside of our research is you have a great diversity and inclusion team already in place. And that means you have strength to build from. And that it's a team that all collaboratively has to work and the parts have to fit together to ultimately be successful moving forward. We talked a little bit already about just some of the data that we collected. You know, some of the things that we do, I'm working with a partner institution right now. We did listening sessions, we talked to literally 700 people in 4 days. But that's a much bigger engagement. I feel very good about what we heard and what we learned from you, and I'm excited to continue to share some of that. When we talk about these diversity officer roles, these diversity professional roles, right now in the U.S., I think we're tracking about 52 current job searches at the vice provost or vice president level. Everybody's searching. And they're searching as a response to what has been happening in our nation, particularly and acutely since the 2016 presidential elections, which saw a spiking of engagement across the country around different issues, a spiking of hate in our nation overarchingly, and also, too, the centennial generation is an incredibly, born 1997 through to today, Gen Z, the centennials, is an incredibly woke and conscious generation. The Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement, the Never Again movement, a campus culture of protest that is happening all across the nation as never before. Had to go back to the 60s to see this level of engagement in some different types of ways. And so one of the responses has been the creation of these roles. At the top, you've got these chief diversity officer roles, reporting and defined as I identified, but you also have other types of senior diversity officer roles. These may not report directly to the president or provost. They may be called CDO, maybe not, but they're not positioned in the same way. They may exist at the school, college, or unit level. One of the fastest growing areas that we're seeing the emergence of these roles is diversity officers in letters and science, diversity officers in business schools, diversity officers in other areas of the institution, and then you have other individuals who have full-time roles too to do diversity work. There are diversity fundraisers out there and coordinators and all these other different spaces, such that there is a professional track that didn't exist 40 years ago that exists very much now, that you can have a career that ladders in different ways and live a life of impact inside of this diversity and inclusion work. These individuals are generally at the C-suite level. They've got executive level responsibility. They can hold a lot of different titles. Reporting to the president. At some institutions, it's the provost. At some institutions, it's a dual report. I see the CDO term as a description. It's not a title. I never tell folks to title their role Chief Diversity Officer because these individuals need a rank, and then the CDO is a complementary nomenclature that goes with it. They've got to be vice president, vice provost, special assistant, whatever it is, they've got to have a rank so they calibrate. When we think about these officers, we see all different types of ways that at times they're even configured as hybrid roles. Hybrid roles where it's the HR function and the diversity function are brought together. Student affairs function, the diversity officer, dean of college function brought together. The thing I say with the hybrid function is it is a strong possibility, but you have to be very careful to ensure that the hybridity of it all doesn't distract the person from doing the core D&I work and providing that leadership too. That's why the team becomes really important and how the infrastructure is designed. Wide range of operational budgets. The most influential officers can touch lots of things in lots of different ways. I already gave you the grounded definition. You know, one of the things that oftentimes happens is there's these myths that surround the role, and you'll hear these myths in different spaces, is anyone can do the work as long as they're diverse. You know, you got to be a black person to do the work. You got to be a Latinx person to do the work. You got to be a woman to do the work. You got to be LGBTQIA to do the work. You got to have at least 3 of those that I just identified to do the work, right? So lots of different things. The thing I say is this. Anyone of any identity could probably do the work at some level. You're looking for somebody not chosen purely by identity politics, but chosen based on skill sets and abilities, right? That can really help to get this thing moving collaboratively. Oftentimes, people will view them as the campus diversity police, that they're going to tell everyone what to do. The thing I say is that President Foster ain't telling too many people what to do around here, because that's just not the nature of how the academy operates, right? It's a shared governance, collegial environment, and this role, too, is a shared governance, collegial leader. However, they will have a team, and their team is a vertical report to them, but there may be other dual reporting relationships or dotted lines that manifest and emerge. Some people say, oh, ghettoizes diversity work. Now it's saying this is the only person responsible for diversity. And the thing that I oftentimes will say to that was the dean of the business school, the only person responsible for teaching business, or is the provost the only person responsible for academic affairs and learning? Is the vice provost for enrollment management the only person responsible for admissions? No. What it's saying is we've got a functional area and this person's going to provide point leadership to it, but it's doing nothing to say that collaboratively it is not still a part of others' responsibilities. People say, oh, this is just affirmative action officer in 21st century clothing. And the thing that I say is that if that's what the role is, then you probably designed a poor role. You probably didn't position it well moving forward. Lots of different ideas here that are expressed at length in my book, but I've talked about them here today. This idea of the vertical flawed model of conception versus a more accurate, integrative, collaborative model of conception. And when we built the theory around chief diversity officers, we actually nested it in theoretical ideas that we borrowed from the work around chief information officers, chief learning officers, chief technology officers. Because the IT world in particular was further ahead than the D&I world was in terms of thinking about organizational design. And so we found some really strong kind of parallel pathing there because each of those roles is trying to cut across silos just like the diversity officer role is. Trying to cut across silos in many different ways. These officers are trying to bring about systematic change at their best. And this means that they're working in ways that are at times entrepreneurial, at times that are symbolic, at times that are educational, and at times are about communication. And at the end and at the core, I always say, if you're hiring somebody and they don't bring a strong political lens to this work, you probably are hiring not the right person. Because this work is hyper-political. Because you're going to walk into landmines, you're going to walk into different issues, you got to have someone who's hyper-political, and that becomes very important. This idea of leveraging an entrepreneurial strategy to move diversity and inclusion work, what is he talking about? What I'm referring to is this, and it was said to me very simplistically years ago by one of my mentors. He said, Damon, as a diversity officer, if you don't have an ability to sit down at the table and cut a deal with somebody, put a couple dollars into it, he says, you're just a symbolic figurehead. He says, you gotta be able to cut a deal. You have to be able to have some resources that allow the campus to tap into them. Now, I'm not talking about endless dollars and millions and millions of dollars that a person controls and can do different things, although there's some officers that they do have that. But what I'm talking about is a set of resources that allow them to be a meaningful senior leader here, that they can be a collaborative partner to a dean, a collaborative partner to a faculty member who's got a great idea, a student organization that's got a great idea, and they don't have to do what we refer to in this business as tin cup, where they have to just go around saying, hey, 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 hey. And I'm not saying not collaborate and share resources, absolutely, but they have to be a player in terms of being able to move this work forward. In terms of conceptualizing the models that exist here, and I'll shoot through this fairly quickly. There's a model that we found where you've got the officer, and they're doing all this work through lateral coordination, lateral relationship, and maybe they have some administrative support. We call that the collaborative officer model. The departmental or unit model, you've got the officer, maybe they've got a deputy chief diversity officer, maybe they've got a program associate, maybe they've got some administrative people, they got some research people or some people that do communication, but they're leading a team in the unit-based model. And then you have what some years ago referred to when I gave this talk, one of the early times, they said, Dr. Williams, that looks like a Cadillac model. Well, that thing has got all kinds of knobs off of it. But in this model, what you see is they actually have units that potentially report up to them. And so what you see across each of the models is collaboration is key in all of them. What is shifting here is the amount of vertical capability that exists in the model moving forward. This expresses kind of a blowout of how officers oftentimes kind of can build out or think about their role. And I'm going to come off of this just for 1 second. So inside of this, what you see is these different lateral infrastructures that should be lining in to the CDO. So CDO reporting to the president, perhaps having some relationship directly with the provost, depending how it's designed at the top. Perhaps having a diversity advisory board that's feeding into them. Having what I refer to as a core team. The core team is generally right there in the suite with them, right there working on the issues with them. Having these different lateral relationships, whether it's meeting with shared governance, meeting with external partners, the committees and the task forces that exist. And then maybe you have a deputy or associate VP or assistant VP officer. And then you've got whatever types of units may be in the portfolio. The percents that are offered here were the percents that we found in our original research that were actually in a vertically integrated portfolio in that manner. So a couple of challenges that we see oftentimes with these officers that I think is really important. One is, a lack of real senior leadership support. And I'm not just talking about the president, I'm talking about the senior kind of level of the institution overarchingly. Not having sufficient human, financial, and technical resources to do their job. When I was on the market years ago trying to get into my first big officer role, I turned down about 3 different jobs that would have allowed for me to get a $50,000, $60,000 salary increase because I knew I wasn't going to be able to win inside of my job. And it wasn't important for me to chase the dollars, it was important for me to chase the impact. Not everybody's going to be so inclined. And so folks, for whatever reasons, they will take roles and they find themselves looking up like, oh my gosh, I'm sinking and I can't get anything done here. And my hope and my prayer for TCNJ as you move forward is that that is not the case. Oftentimes, they have weak staffs and teams. Again, one of the things I love about the team that you have assembled here, you've got dynamic, strong leadership here. And, those individuals can hold and have meetings. I've been in and research teams where I didn't have that dynamic team. So the only time it was a real meeting was when Dr. Williams came to the meeting. And if that's the case, then that oftentimes sets this person up for failure. Title IX and CDOs who are in appointed leadership roles, sometimes the Title IX function is with the CDO function, sometimes it's separate, and they don't have the resources that they need to do the type of work that's important. struggling to really create a network of buy-in and fostering a shared vision, and getting lost in the resistors that are really pushing against the work. Balancing a diversity crisis response orientation and a strategic orientation. One of the things that we see is that there's constant crises happening now, more and more before, partially because of the context that we find ourselves in our nation. Secondly, because our campuses are more diverse. Third, because the centennials are more woke. Fourth, because we live in hyper-segregated communities and these students come here and this may be their first time to interact across difference. All these things create a cauldron of opportunity for a diversity flashpoint to emerge, and then when you connect it all with the connection economy and digital technologies, we're always one heartbeat away from something going viral, right? So one of the things we're seeing as a new pulse point in the work is folks really trying to grapple with being responsive and having really strong bias response systems and being engaged, but also two, not losing sight of we gotta have a bigger picture strategic agenda that helps us to move forward. Not spending enough time in getting faculty involved, right? And really having those conversations to mobilize and to get faculty involved. Feeling as if they've got so many different masters that they have to serve. I've got to serve the master of this issue, and the master of that issue, and the master of this issue. So really, really having a hard time balancing all these priorities that are thrown. The CDO becomes all things related to diversity. When it's not, again, a cadre and a group of individuals who are involved with it. Hiring individuals who are neophytes to the business of change. And this is one of the dynamics I've seen the most. We created the National Inclusive Excellence Leadership Academy, not for chief diversity officers, but for leaders. We actually had 80 leaders do the first cohort. I had 5 presidents, I had 3 provosts, I had deans, I had 30 people with diversity in their title. Because what I realized was that most folks are neophytes to being able to lead change in this area, so we wanted to create a tier 1 platform to help in that regard. And then the importance and the challenge of really creating a broad-spanning educational agenda, a learning agenda for the entire campus community, and then really navigating the current political and legal context and landscape. All represent real challenges that these officers face in many different ways as they're trying to move forward. And so as I talk to leaders at TCNJ, what were some of the things I learned from students, faculty, and staff by way of some of the insights from your community? And I've been teeing them up as I've been talking. One was there was a strong sense from a lot of folks that the glass is half full here. That there's an incredibly strong and prideful culture, that people are proud of the selectivity of the college, and there's nothing wrong with that. That the student body is becoming more and more diverse along many dimensions, and we embrace that as excellence. But what does that mean? Are we finding ourselves on the other side with people saying, are we simply a testocracy? Or is that really excellence? People asking the question saying, hey, shouldn't we be asking, at least looking at this idea of test optional? Folks saying, hey, you know, we're in this environment, in this reality, we're in the state of Jersey. Jersey is deeply segregated. Are we creating a bubble up here at TCNJ? Have we defined a bubble? So people saying those things, and then talking about the fact that there's these inclusion challenges of unconscious bias and microaggression, and looking around and saying, wow, giving some kudos. Our daggone senior leadership team is pretty diverse along a lot of different dimensions at the cabinet level, but what about some of the other leadership levels of the institution? And asking the question saying, hey, what about our faculty diversification? I don't see it there where we need to be. So those were some of the themes that we saw. A second one was folks talked about the need to more fundamentally be connected with diverse communities. And they talked about Trenton, they talked about Ewing, and they said, you know, what is our footprint? Our DNA is a Trenton State College. But yet, who are we today? And what are we doing in that regard? And there were a number of persons who really talked about some deep challenges that they had with the approach to service learning. And it was defined by one person. It was so powerful. They said, I don't know if it does good when we put a group of our white students from privileged and segregated backgrounds and send them into diverse communities on a Saturday morning to pick up trash, and they're afraid, they're not interpreting that experience in ways that are culturally relevant, and then they're coming back, and I said, I don't know if that's doing good or doing harm. Community service learning, service and engagement is one of the high-impact learning experiences that we know really matters, but only if it's done a particular type of way. These were some of the themes we heard. The third was, you know what? We've got to build from the strength that we have in our D&I team. And folks talked about that in a number of ways. They talked about, I feel like there's a positive energy that's happened here. Yes, we had hard moments that happened in the fall. Yes, we were dealing with some issues that were abhorrent to us, but we responded, we've navigated through it, and there's an energy here. How do we continue to elevate this work and not allow it to go back into a closet until the next crisis moment emerges? They talked about a need to move the conversation beyond the choir. They said, look, there's a lot of folks that keep coming out, the same people, over and over and over and over again. How do we get it into the deeper waters of culture for those individuals who are busy in lots of different ways and maybe not as engaged? And there was a general level of support for creating this role. There were a couple folks that had a snarky response here or there, but for the most part, there was a general consensus. This feels like a pretty good way to go, with the caveats I've offered throughout the talk today. So what were some of the things that we offered by way of recommendations? And I'm moving this to a place for some conversation. One is I really feel as if, as a campus, you need to fully embrace and really commit to this idea of the inclusive excellence model. And, this notion of, what is the rationale, the definition that really is inclusive excellence at TCNJ? What are your really defined and clear goals in this area? What are your plans to move it forward? And how are you integrating that into the questions of policy, human resource, hiring priorities, budgeting and fundraising, and your strategic and academic plans? Not just a diversity plan on its own, but how is it integrating and nesting at multiple levels? And the thing I always say is that diversity plans can't breathe without air. Accountability, infrastructure, incentives, and resources. The infrastructure we're talking about now. The resources, a part of it is going into having the infrastructure. The accountability and the incentive elements are what ultimately become important to moving a change agenda forward. And it's ultimately, it requires us to build capability to do this work, right? That means how are we creating leadership and professional development and training and curricular and co-curricular opportunities as a part of an integrated and cohesive plan to help faculty get stronger as it relates to the work they have to do, staff to get stronger as it relates to the work they have to do, leadership to get stronger in terms of the relationship and the work they have to do, and students to get stronger. And that is the type of energy that moves us more and more towards our big goals. Now, we talked about the importance of having this role. I think you should title this role as the Vice President for Strategic Diversity Leadership and Chief Diversity Officer, or title it as the VP of Inclusive Excellence and Chief Diversity Officer. And the reason I like that nomenclature a little bit better than diversity, equity, and inclusion, number one, I love anytime we can create the strong symbolic connection between we need to have a strategic focus to our work and the work that we're tasked with doing. I also love the inclusive excellence language because it's got a national following now and an energy. And as we're talking about that, we're talking about the importance of not just diversity as it relates to demographic, but we're talking about it as it relates to teaching and learning and culture and climate. I think somewhere in that range, I think it really works for you all. I think you've got to really think through, how do you redesign the current diversity and inclusion office to really fit well with this new model? And again, I think you're building from strength in terms of doing that, but really thinking about how these pieces come together to be complementary. Right now, the infrastructure that you're in, it's somewhere between really a unit model and a divisional model, because it's only got one unit that's kind of in that area. And so, when I think about this role, there's Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Disability Services. What else should be in the portfolio? So what else should move to be in that portfolio? We didn't have enough time, enough resources to go deep and to help to really come forward with an answer to that question that I felt comfortable in, and so I did not offer it. So I leave the question for you all to continue to grapple with. We think it's important to build a campus-wide infrastructure. And we lay out some ideas there about the importance of having point leadership in all the schools, perhaps committee structures in the schools. We lay out some ideas of how this thing comes together in terms of a campus-wide infrastructure. And we also talked about having what we refer to as a tripartite budget. Every officer in the country that I have a chance to influence their design, I talk about the importance of having a tripartite budget. One part of the budget is their core operations, like what they need to staff, what they need to travel to conference, what they need to do their work, really externally, bringing in consultants, whatever it takes to do their job. The second piece is they've got to have innovation funds. And the innovation fund piece, a part of it, I love it when it lives as an internal grant that people are competing for, that allow them to tap into the work that takes the CDO into all these different places as a collaborative partner, and then there should be another part of that innovation fund that they can sit down at the table, as I said before, and cut a deal. We found that goes a long way to creating pull energy of change, right? The pull energy of saying, hey, let's partner, let's collaborate, let's do good things together. One of the things that I love to do when I was an officer, and even as an executive in other functional roles, I love to bring together uncommon partners. One of the best initiatives I ever had a chance to partner on when I was at Wisconsin is we were driven by a strategic challenge related to the leadership, academic success of black male athletes at the university. And we said, hey, we're going to create a new initiative that's going to deal with athletes because we were definitely sensitive to Title IX and didn't want to do something that privileged on one side or another. However, it was driven by that challenge. And in building it, we brought together the School of Education, we brought together athletic administration, and my team. We built a project called Beyond the Game, which was all about creating connections and leadership development for athletes to help them understand the bigger picture. We did the same thing around underperformance of underrepresented groups in STEM. We partnered with Letters and Sciences Dean. We partnered with the Research Center who did work in that area. We partnered with School of Ed. And then each of us came to the table with some treasure. I came with a little bit of money. The dean came with a little bit of money. The faculty came with some skills and abilities. And we were able to put some really dynamic and innovative pieces in place. And then we also offer to you several tips in terms of background and the types of persons that we think that you should be looking for. The final thing that I'll offer with respect to this was that you were very clear in saying we want somebody who really brings academic legitimacy, but they don't have to necessarily be a tenured member of the faculty. You were very clear in saying we need somebody who can navigate and definitely respects and can really engage in the governance of the institution, but we think that we would be too narrow if we said they have to have this particular criteria that might box us out. And my experience has been, if you make your search tenure required, you will not get the best candidates. Because the best candidates that have tenure are probably really, really good faculty, but they might not necessarily bring some of these other things that are possible. My name is Damon WIlliams. We are now in Q&A. You've been a wonderfully attentive audience. Questions from anybody? Yes.
The percentages that you showed in that breakdown, what is that based on?
Yes, that is actually based in my grounded research that we did. So we actually collected survey data from nearly 1,000 diversity officers across the country and did a couple hundred hours of interviews and did site visits to about 30 institutions. And so it emerged out of that grounded work.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's like, that's the percentages that should make up?
That was the percentages that we saw in the vertical portfolio of the officer. So let me interpret it for you. So what we found was that amongst those officers who led a vertically integrated portfolio, 62% had cultural center units in that portfolio. 57% had retention and pipeline offices in that portfolio. Only 18% had international affairs in that portfolio amongst those who had the vertically integrated portfolio. Now, one thing I will say is I collected this data nearly a decade ago now. And we're excited. We're getting ready to go back into data collection because we're preparing for the 10-year anniversary publication of both books. So we're going to line this thing up again to see where we are and across the country.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Someone else, anybody else, anywhere. Oh, I know it's thought-provoking. I know you got some questions for me. Yes?
Sorry. I was just wondering if you could speak on that one slide that talked about the disability services and the Office of Institutional Diversity and Inclusion, and like what the premise behind not providing a recommendation for like other responsibilities.
Oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. Give me 1 second. It was this slide here, correct? So what I was saying was, you know, I didn't have an opportunity to go exhaustively deep into really going to the bottom of the well in terms of talking to every person I needed to talk to make such an intrusive recommendation, right? Whenever we're talking about moving, disability services already in the portfolio, so that's why it's here. If I were saying we need to move EOF, or we need to move this unit, the teaching and learning, or we need to move some community outreach and engagement unit, I needed to have done much more research. I needed to have respectfully sat down with those individuals that lead those areas and their teams. I needed to look at strategic plans and what the plans and the goals were. I would have needed to have an offline conversation, probably with the president, to get her take on it before I came through with such a recommendation, because I would never be so bold as to be disrespectful in such a public forum for people who I know do great work every day. The thing I will say is this: reorganization should not be about people. It should be about structures and strategy and goals and where you want to go. And ultimately, we have to make hard decisions to move something from here to here. And that is always something that I say we do with a tremendous amount of empathy and as much evidence as we can muster, and then we move forward aggressively to get to where we need to go. And we don't question it again after we make the decision. Yes?
So there's 50-some searches out there for similar positions.
Yes.
You come into us from the outside. What would you find particularly appealing about TCNJ?
Oh, great question. Oh man, that's a great question, friend. You know, a couple things. One, I think that you've already done this work. I mean, I'm just gonna say it. That you said you work with me and put something together, that's gonna make it attractive to a lot of people in terms of thinking that there's some thought that went into the role, right? That is gonna send some good messages. I think the fact that you've already titled this thing at vice president level, I think that's gonna send some good messages. However, that's not a point of difference. Amongst those 50 that are out there, that's a point of parity for most of them. They're at the VP level. This is what would set you apart. If you put in there, this is what your budget is, in this range, and it's a decent number, that's gonna send some strong messages. Because what's happening with a lot of these new officer roles is they got these headhunter firms. And the headhunter firms are running a hoodwink on the nation. And what they're doing is as follows. They call people like me and say, oh, Dr. Williams, we need you to apply for this job. Okay, and they give us a 30-page challenge statement, right? Anybody who's ever worked with a headhunter, y'all know what the challenge statement is.
They've been doing it for years.
That's right, that's right. They get the challenge statement, right? And then there's going to be 30 pages of everything. TCNJ is set in the northeastern part of the country, in beautiful New Jersey, neighboring Trenton, with a student body that's selective and all this great stuff, right? With new President Foster, who brings visionary leadership and support for them. All this stuff is going to be said, right? Ain't going to miss no budget. Ain't going to miss no staff. Not going to mention no strategic plan and operative priorities. Not going to mention any of the fundamental adobe that you need to do your work. But then when you talk to them on the phone, oh, they want to wait for the officer to get there to help them shape what it's going to be. That's a bunch of bullshit. Excuse my French, right? Excuse my French. People want to know they're going into a strong context and they can do their work. You know, particularly if I've got a good job, right? Somebody who's chasing their first appointment may be a little bit different. Someone who is in a strong job and you're trying to get them to move. So I think this strategic work is going to serve you well. I think anybody who comes here, your culture is going to serve you well. I felt great culture here, you know, and I don't always feel that. One of the things that I found is people were passionate, but I didn't feel such anger that it was creating a toxicity. People were clear, and they were talking about the problems. But there's some campuses we go to where people are so boiling over with anger that it becomes a dangerous space for a new officer to come in. So those are a couple of points.
Thank you.
Yes, for sure. Let's go right here. Yes.
So as a follow-up to that in the previous question,
Yes.
without recommending what units might report,
Yes.
given our institutional culture, our mission, our size,
Yes.
you know, and what you've seen around the country, what ought to be the fundamental kind of level of support that's central to the office? You know, a staff administrative support, is there an associate, VP, you know, how many people, what's the level of resource? It's not infinite.
Sure, great question. So a couple things I think. One, you've already done some of the hard work by moving the associate VP role and the director role from HR and student affairs, who I have incredible respect for both of them as leaders. So I think you've already taken some great steps there. The design question for them, for those roles, is how do they realign to drive this new vision going forward, right? Do you create a deputy chief diversity officer role? Do you create a role that has a training kind of portfolio? Like, what do you do to kind of maximize those leaders and what they bring to the table? And I think there's an incredible opportunity to build from strength here, and that's why I kept talking about building from strength. The second thing is you've got some legacy budgets that are already there. So those budgets are already in play. So the question then becomes what new resource would need to get added. And the thing I always say is that all of our institutions are resource dependent and strapped, right? And we're already making a big time investment by creating the VP role, moving this one, making it hard dollars, investing in disability. We've made some investments. But I think additionally, you know, in terms of some innovation funds, I think that having some innovation funds, you know, around $100,000 at minimum, you know, for the officer to be able to do some of this partnership work, having something that's probably, you know, 2 or 3 times that at least on the faculty side, to really do some of the partnership stuff, that doesn't allow you to do targeted opportunity hires or anything like that, but it allows you to do some things in terms of getting more strategic. And the thing I say is, first we try, then we do, right? So we can start here, but how do we build a growth plan over a couple of years and continue to make contributions? The other piece that I think is important is at the VP level, this individual, if there are any foundation accounts that exist that are consistent with their mission, those foundation accounts should be turned over to this individual as a part of their leadership portfolio, as well as a percent time of individuals who are operating in development to make some of the new priorities that are going to be emerging to support that person in development, similar to how they support perhaps others across campus. Those are some of the pieces I think are important. Last thing I'll say is I think that having some type of a faculty diversity fellow in the office, that would be some type of a faculty buy-down, would be a really strong addition, to particularly have somebody coming out of this faculty context to join with the team in the community. And the other piece is, I think, from a student diversity and inclusion kind of specialist role in the office, to really stay really close to the students. Because as Carrie and Don and their roles maybe stretch in new ways, we want to make sure we don't lose some of the things that are there. And so how do we work to build additively in this? But again, I always say that I'm not one of these consultants that comes in and doesn't bound this in reality, right? This might have to be a build. But you commit to it, you find the resources and get it done. Let's go. I have one right here with the glasses. Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate the fact that you mentioned, you know, that we look at the glass half full and the work that we currently are doing and building from the strength, right, and from the work that has been accomplished. However, when you mentioned the need to go beyond the choir, you know, that was some of the recommendations you received. Do you have any recommendations on how do we do that and how best to do that, or any national trends of successes that we could probably implement on our campus?
Yeah. A couple things I'll offer. One is, let me go back to one of the infographics previously. I think it's helpful here. So, you know, one of the things I think is really important is, you know, what we do at all dimensions of this pyramid. This pyramid is really about going beyond the choir, right? And so particularly when we start talking about how do we build accountability into the system. So a couple things I think are really important in terms of accountability. One is, I think, the degree to which we start to make our diversity and inclusion goals an element of our annual review and performance systems, right? Whether we're talking about faculty activity reports, whether we're talking about it in terms of, you know, I don't know if this exists here, but merit and annual reviews, whether we're talking about in terms of 5-year appointments of deans and those who are contracted, I think the degree to which we put it in there starts to move it some steps to moving beyond the choir. I think another thing that becomes important too is how do we create a culture of public accounting for what we're doing or what we're not doing. Too often what happens is this dean over here might be all in and they're going out getting new grants, doing all this great stuff. This dean's sitting over here just doing this. We have to create a public accountability and a public conversation that asks leaders to stand forward and say, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm not doing. What I found is that starts to create the subtle energy and pull to get folks to start taking more steps to move beyond choir. A third recommendation that I have, people ask me all the time, they say, Damon, do you think that we should put in place mandatory diversity training and professional development stuff? I say no. As soon as you call something mandatory, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to create a whole bunch of resistance, which in and of itself, I don't think fighting that resistance is the answer. What I do think is having a massive call to action as it relates to a learning platform and a set of learning programs, and how does the president talk with the provost, who talks with the deans, who talks with the department chairs, who says, I'm not telling you to do it, but I sure am hoping to see you there. Right? And you know, at the end of the day, what we're going to do across the school is we're going to actually see where we sit in terms of our performance, in terms of participation in this, as a part of our strategic plan and our key performance indicators in this area. Wow. Romance language, you only had one person there. Wow. Biology, you had 15 people there. Wow. Physics, you had the whole department there, right? But the thing I'll say is this, you got to get them to go do something that's worth them doing. And that's where the rub comes, right? One of my favorite authors is a gentleman by the name of Seth Godin. Anybody heard of Seth Godin's work? So Seth is the author of the book Tribes, right? He talks about, you know, connection, and he talks about innovation and different ideas. And the thing I say to folks all the time, the fastest way to innovate around diversity is to be reading and think about something else and trying to apply it to diversity. The diversity literature, the diversity language, not going to get us to innovation. It's trapped in doom loop too often. You got to break out of that cycle, look at something else to pull it over. One of the things that he says is he was driving down the street in your car, and you saw a cow, right? Oh, it's a cow. Oh, you just keep on going, right? But if you were driving down the street and you saw a purple cow, I mean a Lakers purple cow, you would stop the car. You probably get out the car. You pull out your phone. You take a picture of the cow, right? You might start live streaming, right? Too often, when we create diversity and inclusion learning opportunities, they're brown cows. They ain't purple cows. See, the trick is to create a product that someone has a strong experience that is worthy of being talked about in a positive way. They don't have to go into it and say it changed their life. They don't have to go into it and say it's the greatest thing ever. They have to go into it and say, that was a great use of my time. You know, that didn't waste my time. And what does that mean? That means active pedagogy, high impact pedagogy. That means case studies, simulations, videos, role plays. That doesn't mean having someone come in and doing a didactic lecture talking about unconscious bias. There's unconscious bias, we all have it. Let me tell you about the 9 different types of bias that exist. You know, we've got cloning bias, we've got bias, we've got bias to stop bias. I was doing a radio show not too terribly long ago, and they asked me the question. They said, Dr. Williams just said, you know, you stepped away from doing the hardcore D&I work, you were going serving America's youth with Boys and Girls Clubs of America. They said, now you're back on the scene, what's different? I said, well, what's different is when I left, no one was talking about unconscious bias. Now everybody's talking about unconscious bias. And people started talking about microaggressions. They said, well, what do you see as the same? Unconscious bias and microaggressions. Right? And so what we know from the work of Patricia Devine, the really, really outstanding social psychologist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, is that bias is habitual. And there is a science to breaking bias. Cognitive awareness of its existence is just one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is a willingness to want to get better. The third understanding of it is having tools and techniques to know how to get better, so on and so forth. We got to make our training and our learning stuff purple cows for students, faculty, and staff. We got to stop telling people they're broken and flawed. And we got to start lifting people up saying, we need you to be a great teacher. We want you to be a better leader and a better citizen and a better staff member. And I get so frustrated when I see the conversation skewing in ways that don't bring us together and connect us. Red tie, yes sir.
So you have the list of challenges. Are there any challenges that you've seen for TCNJ that weren't identified in those 6 items?
You know, I didn't see anything that you know, in my challenges that I kind of talked about here, I didn't see any that particularly stood out as kind of TCNJ unique or different at this point.
Everyone?
Please.
So this is the one I've been wrestling with. So you, and I'm so glad you brought up building these tribes, because our tribes is about you create your identity within also this group, this tribe.
Yeah.
And then you have to build the lateral connections, as you said, to these other tribes. And what I'm seeing at TCNJ, and I'm new here, is that when we had some of the challenges in the fall, the racial challenges in particular, we did a lot around race. And I tried to say before that at one point, and there are a lot of pushbacks. So this is where I like stepped into something that had vestige from time before, which would say, well, why aren't we thinking more universal, like inclusive excellence? Why aren't we thinking about LGBTQ? Why aren't we thinking about religion? Why aren't we thinking about some of the abilities? Why aren't we thinking about this area much more broadly? And the pushback I got, and I'm really I'm taking it in legitimately, was because our fundamental first issue is about race. And we can't, there's sort of almost a, what comes first in this pathway, in this work. And so you did, people thought, well, the universal inclusion, like, yeah, that's great, sure, that's what you feel like you have to say. But let's get to it, right? You know, those things aren't as important as this racial problem we've been having. So I think that I've been wrestling a lot with that, you know, sort of almost the nested levels of diversity and inclusion. We'd love to hear whether other places have. It feels like a challenge to me, and we'd love to hear others.
Absolutely. So, you know, obviously, when you start talking about all these different ways that we dimensionalize diversity and inclusion in the 21st century, right? Age, race, ethnicity, mental and physical disability, sexual, all these different ways, right? And they're all nested in a different social-historical context. And, you know, the unfortunate reality that really manifests in your story for me is that race is still the most problematic and challenging issue, not just the 20th century, but the 21st century, and damn, if we're not careful, it's going to be the 22nd century as well, right? So inside of that, what I've found is that oftentimes there's so much pain nested in that racialized conversation that people can't even come out of that to look at the other aspects of it. The other part of it too is that it's usually the race conversation that sets the powder keg to explode. It's not the disability, it's not the gender, it's not the LGBT, it's the race. And so that usually is what sets the conversation off. The third thing is oftentimes when you're dealing with activist-oriented students, it's usually the underrepresented students who are on the front line, and what we're seeing now more is oftentimes more intersectionality and fluidity with this generation of students, right? So I am claiming membership in this group and this group and this group, but still race is highly salient, a part of it. The thing I found is this. I think we have to have this conversation of race, and I think we embrace it, but I think at the same time we're doing it, we gotta do this. We gotta do this, and we gotta do this. And we don't shirk from that. When I was at Madison, I'll never forget, you know, I rolled up, you know, Mr. Inclusive Excellence, in Wisconsin. That's a racialized context, right? And it's not just a racialized context, that's a black-white dichotomy, because it's Midwestern and it's Wisconsin. Here I come, Mr. Inclusive Excellence, and I gave an interview. I said, well, I'm not the vice provost for blackness. I'm black, and I'm male, but I'm the vice provost for diversity and all the other titles, and I have to do, oh, why did I say that? The backlash that I got from the black community until they saw through my actions what I meant. So that I was embracing the Women in Science and Engineering Leadership Institute. I was embracing the Women in Science. I was embracing the Black Male Coalition. I was embracing the Latinx and the Hmong community and the Native community. But it took a while for them to see that, right? It took a while for them to see that. That's one of the reasons why, you know, I tell folks in this officer role, this officer, good, bad, or indifferent, becomes the living embodiment of this work, right? And, you know, I would go and give a talk when I had first taken my vice provost role at Wisconsin, and if I didn't say race, gender, sexuality, disability, diversity of background, economic background, of geographic region, if I didn't say language, mental, somebody, throw the penalty flag on me. We throw the penalty flag on Dr. Williams for illegal diversity movement. He did not say disability. You know, penalty flag on him. I mean, and so that comes in, and so that gotcha politics. And what I found is as follows. I was just talking to some folks about this. I was teaching a customized leadership program that I designed for Teach for America online. And so I have, you know, the whole South Carolina team going through this program. And this woman attacked me very publicly because when I started the webinar, I started it off as follows. I said, hey there, well, I love that tie you're wearing there. I love that tie you're wearing. Let me see that smile. Went to this person, hey, why are you frowning? Let me see your smile. You know, we're about to have a great time today. I then introduced my first speaker. I said, we're so happy and proud to have XYZ speaker with us. I worked with this person. They raised $100 million in partnership with the things with it. Let me bring them forward. I said, I love them for 3 reasons. Number 1, they're wicked smart. Number 2, they're hyper committed. Number 3, they bring a smile and joy to their work every day. So the whole time I was talking about energy and smiling. Because what you see about how I'm leading, I'm doing this. I'm doing this. I'm doing this. Why did I do that? Yellow flag on Chief Catalyst, who is leading the discussion for telling a woman she should smile. Right? Because I had been perceived as microaggressing against her. Micro-invalidating her ability to choose. Now, that was not my intention. But what we know is microaggression is not about intention, it's about perceived impact of the recipient of the energy. So then how do you handle that? Right? I ended my seminar with the following. I went back through all the ways I said smile. And I said, if in anything I did, I microaggressed against someone, it was not my intention, and I apologize. I said, but the thing I will never do is I'll never apologize for the energy that I want to create that brings about a smile. God bless you, Teach for America. Good night. And that's how I ended the session. And so those things happen all the time. So I always say, like I said, we move into them, we try to embrace them, we move it forward. But the deeper, more penetrating piece of this is there's an emerging community of leaders who have a consciousness and a set of language, and they're looking for ways to attack. And the thing that I would say to all of us here, if you're looking for an enemy at every turn, you will find one. If you open yourself up to a friend at every turn, you may find one. The key is this, not that someone shouldn't have called me, but you shouldn't have put it in the chat line. You shouldn't have tried to create a public embarrassment, because your wokeness and consciousness does not give you now a license to micro-invalidate me. What it does is gives you an ability to ask me a question. That's different. See, we don't lead with questions. We lead with assertions. And when you lead with assertions, oftentimes what you're trying to do is win an argument versus to have a conversation. These are principles of everyday inclusion that are simple that people have lost sight of. I don't know what my time is. I may be over time. I will go all day long. President Foster, God bless you. I look forward to working with you again.